Okay, well then, let's move on. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Daan van de Grouwe. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Daan, but if not, please do correct me.
It's okay.
Daan is a sociologist and started in harm reduction services in Amsterdam and The Hague, and then in Utrecht-based Trimbus Institute in 2005. Ever since, Daan is involved in many international projects targeting demand reduction or evaluation of drug policies, drug checking in the Netherlands, and innovative ways to monitor drug markets. He has been working extensively in Central Asia in the framework of CADAP project, the Central Asia Drug Action Program, the sixth phase, and organized a regional conference on NPS in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan in early 2018. He also drafted the regional report on NPS in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asian region to be published in the summer of 2021 in the European Harm Reduction Association. Daan's topic today is monitoring NPS in the Netherlands and the importance of the triangulation of data. We're looking forward to your presentation. Daan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Isel. Thank you, Ingo and Heino, for allowing me to speak on our practice in the Netherlands. I will share my screen now. I hope it works. If not, you probably will tell me. In the Netherlands, we have a long-standing tradition of monitoring drug trends, and this includes also NPS. Oh, it doesn't go forward. Let's see. There's a lot of talking about NPS. It was already mentioned by Heino and also by Bernd this morning that in the media, there's a lot of talk about NPS and the dangers of NPS, and also among scientists and in the general population in society, there's a lot of talking about NPS, but basically there's little evidence for the use of those NPSs. It's now coming a little bit, but for instance, in the Central Asia and in Eastern European part of the world, there's no data. Data are lacking, and there's a lot of talk about NPSs, and we believe that in Dutch we say meten is weten, measuring is knowing. Before you know what is going on in your country regarding anything, you have to measure it. So we have set up a very elaborated monitoring system in our country that monitors the markets. I will speak to you shortly about drug checking. It's only a small part of my presentation. Drug checking in the Netherlands is office-based. It's not on parties in clubs and festivals any longer. It's not allowed since 2002 already. So people, consumers, potential drug users, they have to go somewhere at 32 locations throughout the country where they can have their drugs checked on content. It's free of charge usually, it's anonymous, and it's discreet. So there's no worrying of users to be caught by the police. If that would be a fear, nobody would actually send in their samples, of course. So this is what we do. We do that already for 25 or more years. I think next year we'll have our 30th celebration of drug checking in our country. We are fully funded by the Ministry of Health. It's quite an expensive system, the drug checking system. I will not go to in detail, but it's chemical analysis by using GCMS and LCDAD and some other, and infrared as well, so FTIR. So we train people to become a tester, as we call it. So they do simple tests, and in our laboratory, they do the full analysis. But this system allows us to see trends in the potential use of drugs by looking at the samples people send in or they submit. The primary aim, since we are being paid by the Ministry of Health, is to monitor the market in club drugs specifically, so in recreational drugs. And of course, secondary, but also very important aim is to provide harm reduction for those who use drugs. Because when the only thing, no, let me put it in a different way. In Central Asia and Eastern Europe, for instance, I've read all these reports that EHRA have made, you see, and also from my own experience, you see that there's no drug checking whatsoever in that area, or in most parts of the world, basically. And so, if you take a sample, if you take a drug, you'll never know what's in there. You will never know. In our country, at least, we have the possibility to do that, and many users make use of that. Last year, even with the COVID-19 problems and pandemic, we still had over 8,000 samples. Normally, we would have around 20,000 samples a year. That's been analyzed, but last year was roughly the half of it. But the market was more or less the same, actually. COVID did not interfere with the drug markets in any way. And you can see that half of the tablets, half of the drug samples that we have analyzed is ecstasy. It's usually even a bit more. 10%, 11% is cocaine. And then we have this number of substances. 2CB is quite popular at the moment in the Netherlands, 10%. And then you have a few other NPSs, 3 or 4 MMC, for instance, so methadone and 3 MMC. We see that quite often. And as Ben already mentioned in his presentation, we had this issue with 4FA, which was popular a few years back. It was really popular. It was a substance, the effects were similar to ecstasy and speed, amphetamines. But after the ban on 4FA, we saw that there was less interest in 4FA, but the interest grew in other MPSs. And as I will tell you later on, what we have seen in the ban, with the ban that before 4FA was banned, the substance was very pure. The samples usually only contained 4-fluoramphetamine. After the ban, it contained a huge variety of other substances, including 4-FMA, which had similar effects. But so the market, there's one thing that I would like to mention as well. If you ban drugs, it will lead to a more polluted market. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should not ban MPSs, but this is a consequence of banning drugs. As you can see, and it's similar to Germany, is that the popularity of MPS in our country is really limited. As I said, 4FA was the only substance with some sort of popularity, and now it's 3-MMC. But there's always the discussion about what is MPS. Here you can see that, in our opinion, actually, we think that ketamine and 2CB and GHB is not really MPS, but according to the EMCDDA definition, they are. So we have included it here. And then you can see in this slide is that most of those MPSs that are being submitted to our service, and so probably also used, is dealing with classic MPS, if you can say that. It's all these older MPSs that are already on the market for decades, some of them. While this area, so the gray area, is all the other MPSs. So EMCDDA is covering now, I think, around 860 MPSs. And you can see that the number of samples submitted belonging to this category is really, really limited. So this is one way for us of knowing what's going on with MPSs in our country. But there's many more. I will show you a number of ways that we monitor MPS. Just told you about drug checking. Another thing we do is that since 2013, that was in the framework of the EU project iTrend, we started monitoring fora, drugs-related fora. So fora, forums where drug users discuss any even little details of their drug use. And we have a focus on MPS, and this is how it looks like. I have to add the data for 2020 for last year still. I haven't done that yet. But you can see here, you know, it's a good way to also monitor trends in popularity of MPSs. If you look at the gray thing, it's 3-MMC. You see that it's going across, and then it's going down, and now it's going up. Ketamine has always been quite popular, if you consider that an MPS. And you see also a few newcomers, but it's kratom is also interesting to see how that evolved. So this is just another way to look at MPSs in absence of scientific literature and data. We monitor fora. This is actually published, well, I think a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago, in the International Journal of Drug Policy, along with my colleagues who are also involved in innovative monitoring of drug trends. Another thing we do, this was with the Czechs and the Slovaks, and another thing we do with them is web shop monitoring and also darknet monitoring, but not so much darknet, but especially web shop. We have the Czech and Slovaks have developed a tool, the semi-automated shop finder, in which we monitor and crawl web shops on the content of NPSs. It's very interesting, and now, as we will have a ban on NPSs one day, it's being proposed every day or more or less. Now I think it will be 2023 or so. But what we aim to do is to monitor web shops now and also after the ban, and to see what's changing in the web shops. Are they offering a lot of NPSs prior to their ban for free or for low prices, or well, just monitoring those markets? It's very interesting and basically quite easy to do. Then we have, this is an older article, I guess. We have been looking at the purity, adulteration, and prices of drugs bought online versus offline. So we looked at all those samples that we knew were bought online in a number of years, and we checked that with those who were certain to be not bought online. And we looked at the differences in prices, in adulteration, and so on and so on. It was published in Addiction, and probably one day we will do a follow-up on this because it was quite interesting. It is already from 2017, I believe. We also collect data about NPS-related health incidents. We have the National Poisons Information Center that we collaborate with, and my colleagues at the Trimbos Institute, they run the monitor drug-related incidents. So we gather data on those incidents. Very important to know what's going on in your country, and also to know about the effects of specific NPSs, which NPSs causes the most health problems, for instance. We also have been monitoring social media, more particularly Telegram. This came out yesterday, this article. We had the opportunity to compare the COVID-19 pandemic and what's happening on the Telegram channels with the period before and also after the first lockdown. And it has been published yesterday in the European Addiction Research. So again, another way to monitor NPS. And then the last one is that I like to stress as well as a best practice, is that we combine data from various laboratories. So I will talk to you about this a bit more. In 2012, we have been commissioned by the Ministry of Health to set up a focal point new drugs. I think it's called in English, reporting desk new drugs, in which we combine data from the Dutch Forensic Institute, the Customs Lab, and our own lab. So our own lab involves consumer samples. Forensic Institutes usually confiscations, and Customs Labs is imported or exported NPSs. So we combine those data. We do that for quite a number of years already, and it's really effective. Well, it's another, we host the focal point. Data are still confidential, although we have an infographic now that I will share with you in a minute. This I will skip. Outcomes of 2019. This is the most recent report because my colleague is now writing the 2020 data. Is that it was already mentioned by Bernd. We see that the use of synthetic cannabinoids is very limited. If you look at the gray piece there, you see that basically no synthetic cannabinoids are being submitted for analysis to our laboratory. while you see a lot of them at the Forensic Institute, but especially at the customs lab. They always have the most synthetic cannabinoids. And this suggests that the use of cannabinoids in the Netherlands is very limited, but the trade of those cannabinoids exists. So they come in the country and they also go out of the country. So it's really interesting. If you was, and the main message of my talk now is that if you would not compare the data from these different laboratories, you could have a different view. If you will only look at for instance, the customs lab, you will say, well, it's quite popular in the Netherlands. But if you then look at the data from our laboratory, the use is really limited. Very important to know and to compare and to have this triangulation of data. Another group is these phenethylamines. You see a difference here. You see that it's especially popular, so to speak, in our laboratory, but also in the customs lab. So it suggests that there is a user market as well as trade and production of this NPS group. Without this triangulation of data, it would, you get a very different picture. You could get a very different picture of the NPSs than it probably in reality is. So in conclusion, I think I have some time yet. So in conclusion, we consider the collaboration between the various labs very useful, and I would suggest other countries to follow our example. The additional information from social media and forums discussions are also really added value. All data combined give a proper indication of production, trafficking, and use of NPS in our country. And it's very necessary as there's a lot of discussion on NPSs, for instance, in the media, but this is seldomly backed by reliable data. I would like to finish with a case study. It's already a few years back, but it's interesting probably for you to understand how we work. We have this case of those two substances, N-ethylpentylone and N-ethylhexadrone. We saw that in our samples that we submitted to our lab, this was quite often seen in 4FA or other NPSs. And since we have this drug checking system in which we ask a lot of questions to the one submitting the sample, for instance, where did you buy it? We had an idea where these specific samples were bought, because of half of them were bought online, and we knew the vendors. So then you could get into contact with those vendors, which I will tell you in a minute. So what we did, we looked at the data and first we went online. Well, this substance, what is it actually? And then we found out that it is really serious substances with NPS with really quite adverse health risks. And it was already in Europe reported to a great number of overdoses and fatal incidents, not in our country, but in Europe. We saw that because we are also running the focal point to the EMCDDA for our country. So serious substances, both of them. And if you find that in your substances, it's bad news basically. And then we would, what we did was to inform the customers, of course, about this trend. And we tried to get this substance off the market, the NPSs containing also these substances off the market as quickly as possible. We looked at the data from our own focal point, so the focal point new drugs, and we saw that large amounts of both substances were reported in 2017 by all labs together. So it was probably also added in our country to 4FA. Why? We don't know, because it's always strange to, well, we just don't know, because often these NPSs, they are mixed with all kinds of rubbish or other NPSs. And yeah, what we always say, you're basically your own guinea pig. And it's very risky to take those NPSs. So drug checking is really, really so essential. So what we did was we informed EMCDDA about what we have analyzed. We have this coordination point assessment monitor new drugs. Who decides about banning or not? No, they do not decide. They advise the Minister of Health about banning a drug or continuing to monitor. And the minister, in the end, he decides or she decides about banning a substance. So we knew that a major vendor of these polluted samples was orangechemicals.org. Orange, because of the Netherlands, and chemicals because of what they are selling. And so what we do is, what we do that quite often actually, is to get in contact with the vendor, and then we advise them, because we are not law enforcement, so they can say, well, nice that you say that, but we'll just continue to. So we advise them to get the batch off the market immediately, and also to inform customers already sold the substances. And we also checked if any reported incidents related to the substance were existing in our country. Then we looked at Orange Chemicals itself. This is already an old website. I don't think it's running any longer. But you can see here, that they are actually also not just selling those two substances that I just mentioned, but also all kinds of fentanyl analogs and really, really, really very strong NPSs. So, but this is the Netherlands, but it's also happening in Central Asia and Eastern Europe, for instance, that these kinds of web shops, they're more or less the same, and they sell any NPS. And so usually on such website, there's also a contact. Yeah, you can see it in the back, you see the contact. So what I did was to send them a mail and saying, and said, well, please get it off the market as soon as possible. Inform the persons that you've already sold the substance, and we're waiting for your answer. And if not, we will inform our inspectorate, our health inspectorate. So, and this was the mail I got back. It's already, you can see it's 3 years old. But here he said, well, thank you for your kind email, and so on and so on. But as a result of our email, he mentioned that we have checked our stock and discontinued all of our current stock till further notice. And so after which we did not see that polluted samples for a while. I think we never saw it again. So it's very small scale, but it's also harm reduction to the fullest, because you directly intervene in the market of sellers in this case. And I think this is my last slide. Yes, I would strongly advise countries in Eastern Europe and also Central Asia to, these things can be quickly done. The advantage we have, of course, is that we are doing this work for 30 years already, and we have a very good reputation in the Netherlands among drug users that we provide reliable information. We are neutral. We have no opinion about people using drugs, whether they should use drugs or not. We know they use drugs, and so we are very neutral in that respect, but we just analyze the market. And we have a mantra, if you want to live healthy, don't use drugs, but if you want to use drugs, at least do it as safe as possible. And one of the things is to have your drugs checked. So with this reputation, this was also known with this guy called Jeff here. He was very kind actually, and blah, 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 and so on. Anyway, this is what I wanted to share with you. Again, the importance, I would like to stress the importance of monitoring NPSs. Some things are difficult to start, like drug checking, because you need a legal framework that supports it. But other things can be done by anyone. I also saw that, the CE has now supporting web outreach. So that's a very good thing. This is what we have been doing for, I think, quite some years now. To go online, we encourage social workers and others, basically anyone who's dealing with NPSs, even doctors and so on, to go online and to have a look at what's going on there. It's very easy. Telegram app, you can download it on your phone, and you can just, within a few clicks, you are entering a market full of, well, very interesting things. Not just drugs, also the sales of weapons and anything is there. And I think that in order to help your customers in the best possible way, you should know what how people use drugs also, but also how they buy drugs and how easy it is to buy drugs, and how misleading some of these web shops are. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Daan. Really very, very interesting. I was listening and learning a lot from your experience, and the idea of triangulation, adding different sources of information and merging this was practice, especially your last email to this vendor, this kind of, in a way, professionally informed but voluntary intervention, which, can potentially reduce harm. And it has. The response is incredible of this vendor, but also I think what Daan's presentation has done, at least for me, is definitely to raise the question how important are the relation between drug checking services and possible policy implications. Because the more drug checking services we have, the more obviously data we gather, and with that data, we're able to sort of, directly influence policies. Thanks so much once again. I'm sure there are questions. We have, unfortunately, only 4 minutes before we can jump on to the next presentation. There's a question here from Francisco Archila, and he's asking, did your group use NLP or any other machine learning techniques to monitor the Telegram channels for NPS?
We developed our own tool, but I'm not a technician in that respect, so I'm not really sure what my colleague Matthijs Blankers did. It's all written down in those papers that I mentioned, one with the EMCDA and the Telegram paper that was released yesterday from the in the European Addiction Research Journal. We don't use NLP, but well, we developed our own tool to scrape those channels, 2 channels actually, on and we use words. I think it's done with specific words, and we have actually done it before with 4FA, where we also included sentiments. So we wanted to look at the it's also quite interesting. We looked at the fact whether people before 4FA was banned were more positive about 4FA, and the incidents that and after it was banned. It was banned because of the people died from 4FA, several and other incidents, whether there was a difference in sentiment in which people wrote in fora about 4FA, and there was actually. So before the ban, it was more positive. After the ban, it was more negative.
Another comment again from Francisco is saying it's unbelievably widespread, the use of this Telegram channels, as you mentioned. Very interesting, the possibility of sentiment analysis. And a follow-up question, is the code available to implement something similar in other countries?
It is, but you have to translate it to your own country and to the slang people use in their country, because the Dutch language is different from any other language. So you have to look really into the slang used by people who use drugs in your country. So, and also the slang used on Telegram. I haven't talked about it, but we have seen that Telegram is basically, at least in our country, a seller's market. So people are offering many substances and many other things. There are requests for substances, but there are only, I think, in the sample what we saw, I think it was only 5% or so, which could mean they are looking for a substance. So 95%, at least 90%, was just seller's information.
Perhaps I can add something, because as far as I could see, this question was also directed to us Germans. I think it's a real interesting and growing market, these drug selling via Telegram and similar sources, not only NPS, but also illicit drugs. And I think it's really under-researched, and we're trying to get some funding to do research on that since 2 or 3 years, and we hope to manage to have a study on that in Germany as well.
Okay, so then let's just have 5 minutes of break, and we'll be back at 9:20.